There's a number of studies that have addressed this kind of question by taking large groups of people who develop anorexia or bulimia or EDMOS kind of disorders, subjects them to various kinds of assessments, psychological tests, questionnaires, interviews, that sort of a thing, and then asks, how can we identify what types of people develop eating disorders? And across this range of studies, it's very interesting that despite different methods, different techniques, different questionnaires and stuff, a common theme emerges. You get three clusterings of people who are susceptible. One shows eating symptoms. They restrict, they binge, they purge, but shows very little in the way of kind of psychological traits or marked personality problems or psychiatric disturbances. Another group also restricts and binges and purges. They have eating disorders, but is characterized by progressive sort of inhibition and compulsivity and over-control. Then you get this other group. Seems quite the opposite. They restrict, they binge, and they purge, but they show marked dysregulation. They're effectively unstable, they're impulsive, they abuse substances. Now, just let me point out something to you about it. The idea here is that people who develop eating disorders are a very heterogeneous group of people. We can't stereotype those who develop them. And there's a kind of interesting assortment of eating disorder types onto these distinctions. If I ask you all, where are you expecting anorexia and its restricting type to fall? I'm sure you're all kind of pointing out there, right? And I hope that that's going to be true. I ask you, where do you think people with binge-purge disorders are going to kind of load? And probably your first reflex is going to be there, but then I'm going to say, we don't give you full points on that answer. People with binge-purge disorders are a very heterogeneous group of people, kind of like depression. It's something that occurs in a wide range of people. And why I'm bringing this to you is I want to make the point that there are multiple causes and very heterogeneous kind of traits and phenotypes, as we like to say, that are associated with eating disorders. So let me start with some generalizations. I hope you'll kind of agree with them. Eating disorders occur in people with very diverse personality styles. You can't talk about an eating disorder-prone personality trait. You don't have to have marked psychological or psychiatric problems to develop an eating disorder. Some people, as I've pointed out, are prone to this marked dysregulation or heightened inhibition, but not everyone who develops an eating disorder is characterized by that kind of tendency. Today I want to look at what is it that epigenetic science can teach us about. Why do we get such a diverse kind of presentation in terms of styles? You don't have to come from a dysfunctional family or have a traumatic sort of background. Although I do notice that a disturbingly disproportionate number of people who develop eating disorders have had the kinds of backgrounds that ideally none of us would have to experience. And so, again, what does epigenetic science have to teach us about? Why would it be that these kinds of adverse things kind of load in some cases to make people very susceptible? Maybe the one generalization you can make about people with eating disorders is you can't, well, there's odd exceptions perhaps, maybe we'll talk about them, but you can't generally get an eating disorder without intensive dietary restraint. So dieting is a trigger. Restricting food intake is a trigger. And what does epigenetic science have to teach us about that? Okay, I'm going to present my kind of disappointing conclusion to my talk, and then this way too it'll be sort of uphill from here. Eating disorders represent the activation by intensive caloric restraint of very non-specific vulnerabilities in susceptible individuals. And I have to confess on behalf of all of my biologically oriented colleagues, all of our work has led to the realization that we don't identify anything eating disorder specific. Okay, some of you might want to argue with me on that one. But that to me is not as disappointing as all that. You'll see that I think there's something kind of fascinating about the non-specificity of things that make people susceptible. It also says something about how many people can fall prey to the development of an eating disorder. So, what causes these things? I have a slight touch of the dramatic, as you may know. When I started in the field, some 26 years ago now, we used to immediately point the finger at the family. It was moms who were overprotective and intrusive. The family environment was enmeshed. We had all kinds of sort of shame-provoking labels that we applied to families. And I'm sort of pleased to say that data doesn't support that kind of idea very well at all. The stereotype used to be that if you had anorexia, restricting type, you came from an enmeshed, overprotective, over-involved family, your eating disorder was a protest against parental over-intrusiveness. If you had bulimia, the stereotype, and I underline the word stereotype, as most stereotypes is the case, it's not true. We're chaotic and disengaged. What data show is that eating disorders arise in all kinds of families. They're well-functioning, some of them are enmeshed and overprotective, some of them are chaotic and disorganized. Maybe the disorganized family, I don't know if you can see that very well, the colors are kind of weird, are more prone to being associated with impulsive or mood problems in affected daughters. The anxious, overprotective families go with anxiousness in the daughter, but they don't answer the question on eating disorder. Why did she develop an eating disorder very well? And there's really little support for the idea that there are meal-related conflicts that trigger eating disorders in these families, or that the parents in these families have more eating and weight concerns. All of our parents have eating and weight concerns. We live in an eating and weight concern society. So that isn't going to answer the question, why an eating disorder either. So you see a very important manner in which non-specific things might explain different traits and flavors of personality that occur in people with eating disorders, but they don't answer the question, why did you get the eating disorder?